Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about Blood and Bone, because we are still doing this, and today we're going to talk about chapters 9 and 10. I read them last night, I did make some notes, lo and behold, and maybe I can still remember what I thought when I read it. We'll see. So that's sort of what we're doing today. I hope I can, stay sane through all of this. If I look knackered, that's because I am. I'm in severe, need for some sleep and whatnot, but that won't happen until next week, I assume. So anyway, let's get the whole show on the road, shall we? Cheers. Alright, so what's going on in these chapters? We're getting more action-y because we're severely past the halfway point, and that's usually when those novels pick up and there's more action going on. So we start out with another look at everyone's favorite thaumaturg army under Master Golan, and I wonder if you ever would actually conquer a hill, if they would call it the Golan Heights. Anyway, my point is that what we see there is the further dissolution, the fate of so many attempts of going into a jungle and doing stuff there. But what is also interesting here, and this is something that we'll see later on again, is that the story told through Master Golan's eyes, he's our viewpoint character there, does not lack a certain level of irony. Now, I've said it before that Cam Esslemont is good at irony. Steven Erikson is also good at irony, but Cam Esslemont does a lot of humor, possibly more than Steven Erikson, and we can see that here in those conversations that those two have, even though that Golan has with his underlings, whether it's the chief scribe or his second in command, who is no longer his second in command because he's dying, all of those wonderful things. Because what we see there is that the way it is told is very much this very ironic mode with a lot of distance, and with a lot of dark humor, because what you're seeing there is basically how everyone is dying, and it's brutal. But you have these absurd ideas of how bureaucracies can become too weird when you have the idea that animals, since they're part of the glorious army, and if they wander off and get lost, they're called desertions and not just lost animals and stuff like that. So yeah, that is something that we can see. We can see the whole place falling apart. You have the idea that his tent is no longer a tent. Everything is taken over and eaten up by nature in this part of the story. But it's also very much, as I said, a situation that is told through that almost fatalistic kind of humor there. And I do really appreciate that, especially that Golan is still not actually getting it, or is slowly getting it, while everyone is just wandering circles or running circles around him, mentally at least. And especially his interactions with the chief scribe are just absolutely fascinating. In particular, when you have that scene later on, which we are going to jump to right now, which is when they're crossing the river. And you have that whole idea of weird shit going on with those rivers. But you have also the chief scribe actually writing down the official chronicle of that whole adventure. It's something that I guess we've all seen before. I guess famously, obviously, the Iraqi propaganda minister during the Second Gulf War in 2002 or 3 or whenever that was. Two, I guess? Who knows? Was famously still declaiming Iraqi victory while behind him statues were falling and all of that. You know that stuff, right? And the point is that the way this is handled here is very much the same thing. If you're in a specific kind of environment, it is more important to keep up appearances than to actually record the truth, because that's how your system is structured, which is sort of what you're getting in hard authoritarianism, right? And now, obviously, the drawback to that is, of course, that those records are just fucking useless, right? I mean, you read that, the thing that the scribe writes down, and you compare it to the truth, like anyone else who will later on use those chronicles to start whatever they'll like to learn anything from it, will not exactly be happy because they'll like make completely the wrong decisions. So that's an important aspect here, like that such concepts perpetuate, you know, a failure basically. If you disguise failure without actually figuring out what went wrong and why it went wrong, because you're afraid to to lose face or whatever, you'll just like make sure that the next group that will base their decisions on your records will also fail, and that's something that we can see here with that one. But it's you know, the once again, the way it is portrayed is just in like a very humorous way. Plus, of course, we have that scene with the the worms eating out of the flesh of those people, which is absolutely fucking gruesome. But it's obviously also like a metaphor of like how the army, or like even the entire realm of the Thaumaturgs has been infected and slowly breaking apart. So yeah, we have that. What else do we have that's worth talking about? Well, obviously, we get a bit more of the whole Adwani advance on the capital of the Thaumaturgs, and we have their first like sort of real battle, which is not a real battle because we, you know, have that whole massacre of the peasantry. We'll once again see what kind of society the Thaumaturgs are actually operating here, which is a fucked up one, to put it mildly. But that's not exactly sort of like the main thing. Is that we get the information that the Thaumaturgs are bastards and they don't value human life anymore. Just like see anything as objects. And that is bad enough. But what we also learn here, and this is sort of where I'm going at with this, is we kind of get more hints at Calor's past, because, you know, we as the readers kind of know that this is Calor, especially if we've read any other Malazan book before. However, those people have not yet learned it. So we have more hints that there is something going on there when we see one of the Thaumaturgs recognizing Calor killing him, Calor admitting to Jatal that, you know, yes, he's out for revenge there. All of that is going on, and then we have the main thing there that is obviously Jatal and Andaniai. The romance is over, and Jatal is behaving just like every dumb jilted lover, male lover in their, you know, mid-teens will react, which is full of jealousy and embarrassing himself, because, you know, that's sort of what he does there, and we can see that. And it's like, I appreciate the way this is written, because this is not, you know, a romance novel or anything like that. But Cam Esslemont certainly hits the note there really well when, you know, like that first big love, and then suddenly someone much cooler comes, you know, shows up, and you just lose that, and you feel you're super jealous, you feel like shit, and full of self-righteous fury, and then you behave like a fucking idiot. And I do appreciate the way this is made, because you have the whole like interaction with Skaza, who's in any case a really cool guy. Skaza trying to save Jatal the embarrassment, but Jatal is obviously not listening, because Jatal is an idiot, and also probably just like 15 or 16 at this point. So there's all of that going on there, and I think we'll see where this is going. Is Andaniai flirting with Calor, or is she just furthering her ambitions to get more power, or what is going on there? We don't know yet. It's certainly, because we only have Jatal's point of view, we may miss a lot. Who knows? Well, so that's part 2 of the things that I wanted to talk about here. And why is this important? It may be uncomfortable to read this, especially if you're a dude and recognize a lot of your like mistakes when you were younger in this. But I feel it's important because we tend to like, depending on what kind of fantasy books we read. In fantasy, we tend to gloss over a lot of these like interpersonal shit that is oftentimes so very, very frustrating. So having that kind of stuff in here is good because it's something that both Stephen Erickson and Cam Esslemont are bringing to the table in a way that not that many other fantasy authors do. Like a couple of the new ones are doing it. Your Robin Hobb is full of all these like messy personal relationships and shit like that. But with that like larger focus on military fantasy and all these other things that are going on, it is interesting to see that there's still room for that because that's one of those things. If you for like a lot of like military fantasy, military sci-fi, you're in for the action, you're in for all the toxic masculinity of all the dudes and everything. It's like, yeah, but there's still room for like actually human like facets of human life in there, and so that's something that we see here, and we'll see where the whole thing will go. It's also just interesting because at this point we see how the emotional part of it is very much tainting, or tinting at least, Jathal's perception of the entire attack of the entire war. And thus also, and since this is our viewpoint, this is how we also perceive that whole march towards the capital of the Thaumaturgs, no longer as just like an attack or whatever, but it changes its meaning because the parameters through which Jathal is viewing it is changing, right? All right. What else? Well, we got us some more interesting Shimmer Kaaz stuff. When they are like, we learned that their boat is even more fucked than we thought. It actually doesn't even have anything under the waterline. It's just like drifting along, and then it runs aground on a giant worm. And those giant worms show up a lot in these two chapters. There's one trying to eat or destroying the raft that the Crimson Guard is crossing the river on. There is one later on trying to eat Sister Spite. And there is one that the ship runs aground on, the Serpent. Now, obviously, it's interesting that the ship's called the Serpent and then runs aground on like a giant serpent or worm or whatever. I was just like, for a second, I know someone calls it a worm of the earth, and that kind of just rang all kinds of Robert E. Howard, Bran McMorn bells with me, because that's sort of the famous Bran McMorn story by Robert E. Howard. It's called Worms of the Earth. Another thing that we learn here is that these are much older than the goddess Derek, which I guess kind of makes sense because, Derek is not one of the elder gods, so I guess it's one of those worms and a descendant or something. Who knows? Well, we certainly don't know, but it's kind of hinted at that there is, like, once again, the whole idea that going into Himatan, into Ardata's realm, is sort of that place where all the old things can find refuge before like humanity and all the other stuff that is bothering us, like not us but is taking over the world. This isn't just like shown there for a bit and then we're moving on to something else, but it's just interesting to have that whole thing show up for a moment there. At least I thought so. We do have more interactions with the Crimson Guard going for the next, trying to actually get that piece of the crippled guard that was taken by Spite and then Merc and Sour. We have a bit of like action there. And one thing is interesting, that this time around we actually see Skinner take action and trying to get the whole thing and not just following along whatever the priest of the crippled god wants. So maybe he's changed his mind. Who knows? hard to say, but we get like another look at Celeste, and we get a jump into Shadow, which just, I mean, it's not the biggest thing to talk about here, but there's something interesting going on here. One of that, and that is if you're interested in, you know, lore and stuff, which I tend not to be because I suck at it. But here's the thing: you have that whole conversation there. When Edgewalker shows up, and Celeste says that he makes her sad, and we're trying to, I mean, if you'd want, I mean, there is that whole like question of like, who the fuck is Edgewalker? And I know there's all kinds of speculations that I'm not going into because I don't read Reddit. But it's just interesting to have that whole thing. Plus, we see Celeste as a piece of the crippled god, a shard of the crippled god, go all the way into and contact possibly Ardata. What will that do to her? Because apparently so far, the only person that was talking to her, as she was talking to, was Merc. And now she's moving on to talk to Ardata. And how will that change her, you know, personality and her growth as a creature that is gaining more and more on autonomy? Hard to say. But that's sort of what we get out of there, plus a bit of action and now more paranoia, because now the Crimson Guard thinks that there's Malazans out there, and while they are Malazans, they're not actually, you know, officially Malazan soldiers. All right. There's obviously more to talk about here. We need to check in with Cyan and Ponlor. Ponlor, is that it? I keep forgetting his name. I'm such an idiot. I think it's Ponlor. Yeah. So he is, you know, escaping. There's that whole action with locals and whatnot, where we left them at, and now he has Fetmon on his side, or he thinks so. He saves Cyan and thinks that he can control Hanu. And there's like something, there's a bunch of things that are going on here that are interesting. One of them is that both the thaumaturgs and the Yakshaka can both control bodily functions and all of that stuff to a level that other people cannot. So the question is, how similar are they, and how different are they? Apart from obviously the fact that the thaumaturgs, at least in part, are voluntarily choosing to do the things that they're doing and to undergo that training, whereas the Yakshaka are forced to undergo all kinds of alterations and whatnot to reach that state. But it's very interesting because it kind of has that whole how different are creature and creator in a way question that we will probably come back to later on, but that's sort of what we can glimpse from this, I think. So that's something that I find interesting. Another interesting aspect, obviously, is later on that and that we didn't really talk about before, but it's like the class prejudice. Prejudices are all like are on both sides, and they keep continuing, right? It's basically impossible for Ponlor, even though he may actually be a nice dude, who knows, to see both Fetmun on the one hand and Cyan on the other hand as something else than, you know, uneducated village people and whatnot. And even though Fetmun knows all this like jungle lore that he learned from his aunt or whatever, he still thinks of him as like uncivilized and basically uneducated and stupid, which is, you know, problematic in life for us, because if we, you know, come, like, I don't know, if we rely very much or like think too highly of our education, our status, we tend to overlook things. We tend to, and that is dangerous, as we learn here a lot, right? That's just one thing that we see here. The other thing is that I find very interesting is that for And this is sort of part of a problem of like any rigid structure of belief or education or authority, whatever you want to call it. It's very difficult to get out of this, and we can see that when we have Ponlor's point of view. It's like, right, he still thinks that he needs to actually get the Yakshaka back to there, and then we can actually get Cyan educated the proper way, because obviously she has power and whatnot. It's like he just can't understand that the world has changed around him, the world has shifted. He just can't actually believe that. And that's why he doesn't even consider the option that maybe Hanu is just pretending to follow his commands and then almost kills him. It just doesn't happen. The other thing that we see there near the end that I still feel is worthwhile looking at is when Ponlo is like, well, Fet Moon, best thing for you would actually be to go back to your village and become a farmer. And while he's probably right that life as an outlaw sucks and will sooner or later get that boy killed, well, sooner rather than later, I assume, what he can't wrap his head around, and that's sort of the problem, right? What he can't wrap his head around is that maybe he can think of society as well ordered and all of that. He can do that because he's on the top of things. He may have had a rough life, getting there. I'll give him that. But still, for him, it's like, yeah, well, I'm a thaumaturg and you're a farmer. I assume farming is fun for you, so maybe go and become a farmer. And it's like, no, maybe for some people, the safety of a well-structured life still sucks so much because there's no chance of any form of change or anything, that they'll just don't want to take that, and they'd rather take the risk and take all the chances and do something stupid. Well, objectively stupid, because we are not objective rational beings when it comes to these kind of life choices. And I totally sympathize with Fet Moon on that one. It's like, yeah, fuck that. Live your dream, or don't follow the system just because it's safety. So we have that aspect there that I feel is also an interesting thing, just a quick look at, that I found fascinating. Right, and something that I forgot to talk about yesterday that is still very much interesting is the whole conversation during that ghost thing. We have people are celebrating Calor in that ghost situation. So Calor was considered a benevolent ruler for some people, and that's something that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about Calor in general. That Calor is, while obviously an arsehole nowadays, there's probably reasons why he became that, and they may not just be him being born evil. Because if there's one thing we've learned from the Malazan world in general, it's almost no one is born an arsehole. They just turn that way through all kinds of universe hitting them the wrong way and whatnot, right? So it's just an interesting thing to keep in mind and just keep on the back burner. Maybe we'll learn more about that later on. Who knows? All right. What else should we look at, talk about, and whatnot? Right. Two things more, I think. One of them is, of course, the Ulcerk Gotha situation. There's the main thing that we learn from that one is the whole idea is there a difference between wisdom and knowledge? And obviously there seems to be, at least the way this world is kind of built up, right? And one aspect of that is that Osric, however you want to pronounce the guy, is searching for knowledge all the time, but he's never actually contextualizing it on a level beyond just knowing facts. And this is something that those of us who have played Dungeons and Dragons know that intelligence and wisdom are two different stats, right? But even in our world, it's gathering knowledge just for the sake of knowledge will not actually bring us further. There is an additional component to that, and that's sort of what Osric is kind of figuring out there, or maybe not figuring out. And then we come back to one of the main themes of the Malazan world, and that is the influence of parents upon their children and possibly even their grandchildren. Because we get a small hint that Osirk's father was just gathering all kinds of knowledge and never actually learning anything from it. And those of us who've read Forge of Darkness and Fall of Light kind of know that, right? And now Osirk has been doing the same thing, and then Osirk, because give him that, he gets a moment of like sort of realization. Osirk is like, well, actually, I remember that moment when I just barely saved Lorik from, that situation in House of Chains. He was literally doing the same thing. He was just looking for knowledge, not thinking about the consequences. So maybe it was kind of my fault because I never showed him any other alternative because I was an idiot. Now, obviously, that gets, shrugged off rather quickly because we're still talking Osirk here. And self-doubt is not exactly his main strength. But it's something that is important to understand because it has these like echoes to it that we're not talking about explicitly in this book, but the idea that like the sheer quest for knowledge deprived of any other dimensions can lead to all kinds of dangerous things, right? We're figuring all kind of shit out and we're never asking if it's a good idea to actually learn that kind of stuff, because once we know stuff, we can't unknow it. We can't unread, unhear, unsee. We can't forget these kind of things. Not on a personal level, but also not on a species-wide level. And there's obviously been all kinds of debates about that in science fiction literature and fantasy literature. There's a really funny short story by Stanislav Lem about that, when we talk about the idea of like someone traveling back in time to make sure dangerous inventions are not made and stuff like that. It's something that we've spoken about before, the whole idea that like once you open that box, that Pandora's box, you can't close it again. And knowledge is just like that. And that's sort of something that you can add to that whole idea of like knowledge is different from wisdom. Because wisdom is sort of like knowing when to actually do something or when not to actually do something. So that's that. We also see Cowl escaping from the ground and following the whole like what's going on with the Crimson Guard kind of thing. We see Temper stab Cowl to death, but Cowl doesn't die. So is just Cowl immortal? Or is like every avowed of the Crimson Guard immortal? And if so, what does that mean? Who knows? It's kind of difficult. We'll talk about it later in a sale, I promise you that. But right now it's sort of just like another hint that there is a greater mystery going on with the Crimson Guard, because apparently also Cowl, as an avowed, is already connected to something so strongly that it is impossible for the House of the Azath to actually take him down or keep him down. So that's something else that we find here, that just like further information on the ongoing, like what's going on with the Crimson Guard storyline that we're sort of figuring out over time. Right? All right. So there's that. And there's just like, I don't know, one or two more things that I figured like we should talk about today. One of them is Lady Spite. And the other is the Queen of Dreams talking to Bug, who's just called Bug here, which is cool, and their trip into the jungle of Himatan and encountering those Himatan creatures, because there's a lot of lore buried in there, like a few sentences there, if you've also read Carcanus, right? So we learned that apparently the Enchantress Turis is very similar to Ardata, which, we kind of know from back then. There's that. The other thing, however, is the big question, like, who decides what is monstrous, what is a monster, and what is not? And the answer, obviously, is humans decide. When we say humans, we obviously mean the mainstream, like we mean society in general. The people in charge decide what is abnormal, what is normal, and then we start and call them the abnormal, the abnormal we call the monstrous, and then we call them monsters. Which is sort of what kind of happens when we have that situation there with all these creatures showing up. The typical Himatan, are they soul taken? Are they divers? Who knows? Apparently they're neither. Because we kind of learn, this is like the other lore thing, right? Is that there were creatures that could actually do the shape-changing thing back in the day. And most of them died. And some of them just fled to Himatan. And those people who could do that, I guess, are the aerosol, if I understood and remember stuff from Carcanas correctly, but who knows? It's just an interesting idea that like monstrous is first of all connected, in this case, like what is a monster is connected to appearance, to shape, to body type, and not to like personality. And thus, just like a pure like choice or idea of whatever you might call mainstream society, in this case humanity, in like this kind of story. So yeah, there's that, and that's just like an interesting thing that I personally enjoyed to have that debate, at least, you know, scratched on the surface. I mean, that's sort of what these books do. They're not fully developed, and most of them are not fully developed arguments in one specific philosophical or whatever debate. But what they do is they point you to all these different aspects, and then you can go and take whatever you find interesting and then dig deeper and read and think and whatnot about it, right? So just pointing these things out. Anyway, let's have a final look at Lady Spite before we end this for today. Lady Spite is also encountering Himatan creatures. She's her like full-on self, and then they set one of those worms on her, and that worm kind of swallows her, and then she destroys it from inside. And here we come to something that is important, I guess. And that's a general debate that we should probably have on Lady Envy and Lady Spite together, because they're sort of in the same boat there. And that is that what makes us grow as people, what makes us understand, like, or start to feel like responsibilities and whatnot, is knowing limits, is knowing the limits to our own power. And with those two, they never learned that. Like, when you look back at Carcanas, they've always been people that don't know any limitation to their power, because they are very, very powerful. And if you can have whatever you want with no one slapping you down, with no one telling you, no, this is impossible, it's very difficult for you to learn restraint. It's also very difficult for you to accept that other people have a right to their own like parts of like life, the universe, agency, and what have you. It's just very, very easy to forget that if you get never shown that. And that's sort of what we learn as kids when we grow up, ideally, right? We kind of encounter other humans or other people in general. We encounter other people, and those other people, they have boundaries, we have boundaries, those boundaries crash, we want stuff, they want stuff, those things collide, and we start to negotiate compromises and ideally respect other people's wishes and boundaries, at least in part. And if that never happens because you're, a fucking powerful whatever pseudo Azathanai, there is always that chance that you will never really learn. Spite and Envy have never really learned, and even in this situation, she still doesn't learn her lesson. She's just like, yeah, fuck it. No one can withstand me. I'll just kill everything, so get out of my way. Is that a healthy attitude? I don't think so. The question, however, is, will Spite ever learn? Now, that's something that we'll find out very soon when we continue this book, which I guess will be tomorrow with chapters 11 and 12, or maybe 11, 12, and 13, who knows. And, yeah, I'll let you know. And until then, thanks for watching and all of that, and I'll talk to you real soon. Cheers.